here in your enterprise sales, you're building value with the prospect, right? And so the
100%.
assumption that they're stupid and you're smart, and as long as you ask the right questions in the right order, they will become, malleable in your hands, doesn't really fit there. How do you take that with the questioning and having like a line of questioning and yet not being overly manipulative or adversarial?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think one of the best lessons that you taught me, that like honestly changed my way of just changed my way to totally think about debate, is like the best debaters are not the ones that seek to like argue or like defeat in an adversarial way. It's to build as much shared understanding as possible, right? And that's one of the things that I always tell people when they're like, "Oh, you're a debater, like you're gonna want to beat me." I'm like, no, like one of my biggest mentor taught me that it's all about shared understanding, because if there's 10 points that you guys can potentially contest and you can eliminate or mitigate 8 of them and say, "Hey, we agree on these 8. So let's
Mm-hmm.
focus on the 2 issues that we actually have issues with." That's
Mm-hmm.
how you start to shift the conversation on your turf, right? So that's actually one of the strategies I employ in my sales process too, especially when we're in competitive bake-offs against competitors, is let's not try to argue this stuff, which is just like in the weeds. Like, let's just say, yeah, we're the same. Like literally this and this, they're great at this. We're also great at this. Should not be a part of your decision criteria because we're equally good. These are the areas where we actually differ. That's how we've won some of our biggest deals in my patch. But to go back to answer your question on the adversarial piece, like there's certainly a line there that you have to be mindful of. But from my perspective, right, um, there is a difference between like open-ended discovery and unfocused discovery. And what I
Right.
mean by that is open-ended discovery is not trying to drive them to have the same answer or the exact answer, but it's creating swim lanes around your questions so that it can be 5 potential answers, right? And if it's not one of those 5 potential answers, either there's a sales play that you haven't thought about, an additional way to monetize your products, or they're not a good fit, right?
Right. Other is always an option. We have to be attuned to that, meaning adapt in the moment to whatever that was, not force fitting people into one of the five.
100%. And I also think like it's very much it can also like it differs depending on where you're at in the maturity of your startup, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
maturity of your right? Like when you're really early on, you're still trying to like identify product market fit, and you're trying to identify what are your sales plays, like what is your playbook. Like your discovery should be honestly like in some ways more unfocused. Like you should really be trying to understand what their problems are that you could potentially map to, not the problems that you know you can solve, right? Um, but like where we're at right now, Grafana, like now that I'm 4 years in, it's like yes, your discovery should be open ended. It's not yes
Yep.
no questions, right? But you have done enough work where you've identified like the 5 or 6 patterns that you can match against, right? The 5 or 6 sales plays, things that you know that we're a good fit for, that we can actually solve and provide positive ROI on. It's creating swim lanes around the discovery where like it's not like they can only answer with one thing, but maybe they can answer with like 5 things that would make sense as an answer to that question.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can build your line of questioning for there, right?
Yeah.
So ideally, like the more product market fit you have, the more you're attuned to like the problems that you actually can solve, then you can do more lines of questioning, sort of discovery. I argue that lines of questioning correctly deployed actually makes it feel more like a fluid conversation, right?
Yes. Yes.
Have disconnected questions, it's very jarring for the person being asked the
Okay.
questions.
So,
You feel
so
like
in my sales training practice that I do with Steve and Tomlinson, we actually practice this game. We call it executive chess. And the idea is you can think as long as you want and then say one statement, never 2 points, just 1 point per turn.
yeah,
And it's actually the most natural thing is think about it for a second and then say, well, what caused you all to choose that initiative last year? That's open-ended and directional at the same time. Person says something, think, make your next move. And when you slow down time like that, it's really weird because the sales reps are always like, I'm pausing a lot. This is really awkward. And everybody else listening is like, No, that was like one of the most thoughtful and progressive conversations ever, because you skip 7 or 8 doors down the hallway when you have very precise choice of what the next point is.
100%. So that's like a thing that, you know, I learned too, is like the effective use of the pause, but then also you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's the word that I was struggling to find in my vocabulary, is directional discovery. That's like super important, right? Open-ended but directional. But from my perspective, like the really unique thing about debate that we can pull into sales is for sure like lines of questioning.
Right.
That idea of you're not asking a question just for the answer to that question, but for what that answer sets up next.
Right.
Right.
I just pulled this up because this is how I've been training people on this concept of like, there is a point in which you have shared assumptions, and there's a point that you diverge, and you're on the same side of the table on the left before you've reached your conclusions. And when you can get to the same side of the table as somebody, then you can work like you're both staring at the wall together. And why do we go this way or that way, instead of being across the wall from each other?